Folks, it's finally here. We are doing the prospect episode. There's no more roadblocks. There's no rumors. There's no trades or signings or moves to discuss. The deck is clear. Pitchers and catchers are about to report, so we can do the prospect episode here on the Bleav in Mets podcast. Welcome back in. Chris Schubert and Jack McKessie with you, finally delivering on what feels like a promise since we started the podcast to talk about our 2025 prospects that could make a serious impact for the Mets this upcoming season. Jack, the moment is finally here. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, Chris. There's a bright future ahead for the Mets, I think. Even if it's not in 2025, there are some prospects that I'm excited to see come up this season and excited to finally, after many weeks, get the chance to talk about them.
Yeah, we hope the Mets have a bright future. You probably hope that you have a bright future with your sports betting. If you want to do that, the biggest betting weekend of the year is finally here, which means more updated odds and props for Super Sunday. BetOnline, the world's most trusted betting platform, and your number one source for online betting. Hundreds of prop bets, MVP odds, and exclusive in-game live betting. BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline offers you everything and more to enhance your game day experience. Visit the website today and make game day action that counts a little bit more. BetOnline, the game starts here. You want to start? You want me to start? How do we want to do this?
I think
mind you, I need to let the audience in on a little secret. Normally, This show is pretty meticulously planned. We know what stories we're going to talk about. We know what direction we were going. Before the show, you started to reveal your list. And then you stopped yourself and you're like, I'm going to save it for the show. So yes. I don't know who's on your list. You don't know who's on my list. There are going to be some names that I probably haven't considered that I'm going to reconsider while you're talking. So who knows who's going to end up being on this list. So we're kind of in the dark on this. I think we'll go 5 names each. I think that's fair. Yeah. And we'll have some crossover. I guarantee us that there's one name I already know that we both have on our list, just by guessing.
Yes, I think you're probably right. At least one. So I'm going to start by saying something to, I guess, put a qualifier of sorts on my list. To preface here and to kind of make this more clear for the audience if they're not familiar with the lore behind this show idea. We're talking about the top 5 prospects that are going to, we think, play the biggest role in the 2025 MLB Mets roster.
Yep.
We're not talking about the top 5 prospects that we're excited for in the future. We're not talking about the top 5 rankings for us personally. We're talking about who we think is going to be the biggest contributors.
Right. Anyway. Spoiler alert, Jonah Tong is only going to get mentioned here as this example. He's not on my list, right? Like he excited about him, would be on a top 5 prospect list for me, but doesn't make this list because we are just looking at players who can make an impact in 2025. And I need to put another disclaimer out there. Guys that are in the minors like Nick Madrigal and Joey Meneses, like those guys don't count for what we're doing. I know those guys are going to get like 25 at bats at some point during the year. They don't count for this exercise.
Right. These are all players that generally, and this is where I'm kind of going to segue into my list, have not made their MLB debuts. However, I actually have a few that have made their MLB debuts, but I've made sure that they would still qualify as rookies under MLB's guidelines. So if people are unaware, that means a player that has, as a hitter, fewer than 130 at-bats means you're still a rookie. And if you are a pitcher and you've pitched fewer than 50 innings, you still qualify for the rookie status this coming year. So with that being said, the top prospect, I'm putting in air quotes here, that I would say is going to contribute to the 2025 roster is one that has already made his MLB debut. He's already thrown some innings, Chris, in some important situations.
Yeah, I already know who this is.
But he's thrown 35 innings, so he's just under that 50 innings pitch limit. So he will still qualify as rookie in 2025. It's Daniel Nunez, I think, is going to be...
This is cheating. This is cheating. I'm not going to stand for this.
It might be, but when I look at who Fangraphs listed as top prospects for the New York Mets last year, Daniel Nunez is on there. Obviously, he made his debut and got hurt, and that cut his season short. He probably would not even be eligible for rookie status if that didn't happen. But when I look at what he did in those 35 innings, 25 appearances, 2.31 ERA, 2 wins, responsible for 0.8 baseball reference WAR, and struck out 48 guys and walked 8. I think that projects really well going forward. I think he's very clearly, as soon as he's healthy, going to be a major part of the back end of the Mets bullpen. Even though he's not technically a prospect anymore, we were not really considering Daniel Nunez, I think, going into the last year, and now he is a major part of what the bullpen is going to look like. I think the fact that his walks were so low last year bodes really well in a pitching staff that struggled, especially down the stretch with letting on free runners. And whenever he's back and healthy, he is going to be a major player in 2025. And I know, Chris, that you said this is cheating.
It's cheating. Yeah, 100%.
But this is a player that is going to qualify for rookie status still, and I'm edging him onto the list because of that qualifier.
Well, I'm going to take a guy who also has thrown at the big league level. But this guy has pitched in 3 games at the big league level, has thrown 3 1/3 innings, which is more in line with what I think you're trying to accomplish here, other than going with a guy who is the team's setup man for a decent chunk of the season. But I like your workaround. I appreciate the intent here. But I'm going to go with a guy that I don't know if we've talked about him on the show. I know offline I have thrown this guy's name out to you. And he throws a cutter, he throws a 99-mile-an-hour sinker, and he throws a slider. If there's somebody that Jeremy Hefner is just waiting to get into the big leagues and just unlock the potential. And this is a guy that was hurt last year, had Tommy John surgery in 2022. Bryce Montas de Oca is going to be a major contributor to this bullpen at some point, because as we know, we need to look at the way David Stearns constructs a bullpen. He has always said the bullpen that is there on opening day is not the bullpen that is there in July, is not the bullpen that is there in August, is not the bullpen that is there in September. And guys rotate through. And this is a guy, 28 years old, who has life on that sinker, throws a nasty cutter, has the slider, has all the pitches of what we know Jeremy Hefner and company like out of guys that they throw in the bullpen, or at least have on their pitching staff. And this is a guy who didn't get a decent look, came up, struggled in those 3 outings, then had the Tommy John surgery. And so I think this is one of those guys that's going to be right there in AAA. And the moment there's an injury, if he starts to perform well down there in AAA, he's going to be one of the first guys up this upcoming season. So I think a better representation of what you were trying to do with your first pick, as I'll put a reliever on there as well.
Yeah, Chris, I really like that pick. I remember, for some reason, I really associate Bryce Montas de Oca as a guy that I remember just watching in spring training, having just absolutely electric stuff.
Oh yeah,
out of the bullpen.
Tops out at 102. Like, yeah, if he can command it, man, that you got something.
Right. It kind of, he's obviously not Jordan Hicks level in terms of velo, but like it's a similar vibe where if he can, like you said, command stuff and get things going at that speed, if he's able to recover from his injury and still be able to pitch at that level, I'm really excited to see what Jeremy Hefner and the pitching development staff are going to be able to do with him in 2025 and beyond. Chris, my next pick is also cheating. I'm just going to come out and say,
okay, so you've made 2 selections and you are cheating on both selections. You're going to pick Luis Angel Acuna now is your next pick?
That is absolutely correct. But I guess it's a little bit better because he only played in 14 games, which is...
We'll let the listeners decide if it's better. I think you've cheated on both picks. Luis Angel Acuna, the 2024 season doesn't happen. The end of the year doesn't happen if Luis Angel Acuna doesn't come up and play the way that he played for that 2-week stretch. And I don't know if it happens if Daniel Nunez isn't the setup man. But go ahead. You do you. We'll let the listeners decide how much of cheating this is.
Let me reiterate the rookie qualifications.
Okay, yeah, please let everybody know what the qualifications are. Thank you.
If you have fewer than 130 at-bats season, you do not surpass the rookie qualifications. Luis Angel Acuna in 2024 had 39. He did not have anywhere close to 130. He appeared in 14 games. And yes, the contributions he made were crucial down the stretch. When Lindor was hurt, he had that back injury. The 2024 season is not the 2024 season without Luis Angel Acuna and some of his late game heroics. And just
my guy was a defensive replacement in the playoffs, and you're putting him on a list of rookies prospects that can make an impact in 2025. My guy was on a playoff roster, was on a wild card roster, was on an NLDS roster, was on an NLCS roster, and spoiler alert, would have been on a World Series roster if they got there. And you're trying to pass him off as, a prospect that can contribute. The listeners are going to see right through this. But go ahead, please.
That's fair. I'll have you know, MLB Pipeline ranks him as the Mets number 12 overall prospect still to this day. But don't just take it from me. Take it from Mets manager Carlos Mendoza, who said during Amazing Day about about a week ago, he said, Luis Angel Acuna is going to have a big role. He's going to have a huge role. I said, McNeil's going to be a big part of our team. Luis Angel is right there too. You can make the argument, and I think it's a fair one, that Luis Angel Acuna should not count as a prospect. But it is very clear, based on what we saw last year, based on what's been said this offseason, that he is going to be a part of this roster. Even if he's not an opening day starter, there is a future on the starting roster, in the starting lineup for Luis Angel Acuna. I think we've talked about this before, Chris. I think the most obvious spot is at second base. You and I both know Jeff McNeil is not long for the Mets, at least we assume. And there is a very clear spot at second base where he will be the double play partner with Francisco Lindor for at least the next 6 or 7 years. And I think when it comes to prospects, however you want to define that, he's up there in terms of ones who will be absolute contributors to the 2025 Mets.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about Brett Brady for your next pick when you go again here.
I'm done cheating. Those are my two.
I will talk about a guy who started last year in high A and struggled because that ballpark in Brooklyn is super, it plays on the water. It's really difficult to get any power, and he played 31 games down there and struggled. Hit 1 home run, only hit 216, had a 124 WRC plus though, so was still finding a way to draw walks, 23.5% walk rate. And the Mets promoted this guy from high A to double A, and if you look at just the basic stats of a prospect or any player, you'd be like, they promoted that guy because the under the hood stuff was really good, despite the park suppression effects that there are in Brooklyn. They called this guy up to double A, and in 98 games, he had 18 home runs. He drove in 58 RBIs, hit 231, was a 133 WRC plus. And look, this is just basic roster management because I think this guy's going to start the year in AAA. If not, he's going to be very quick to be moved up to AAA by the time the season begins. And the New York Mets, as it sits right now, do not have a first baseman on their roster. And so there is a world in which Ryan Clifford ends up being the first baseman. I know there's another hitting prospect that the Mets acquired in a very similar trade that everybody wants to talk about. We may or may not get to him. He might be on one of our lists. But when you look at the roster of the New York Mets, if Mark Vientos is going to go over and play at first base, there are two things that could happen that would very quickly lead to Ryan Clifford, if he's having a good year in the minors, to be called up. What if Mark Vientos can't play first base and it's just an absolute mess? Or the rotating cast of characters between Luis Angel Acuna, Ronnie Mauricio, and Brett Beatty, who are the rest of Jack's list, are rotating through at third base. And if they don't play well and the team decides, you know what, we're in the middle of an NL East race right now, we're trying to keep pace with the Braves, we're trying to keep pace with the Phillies, we cannot have a black hole at third base. So we're going to move Vientos back. Who plays first base? Boom, there goes Ryan Clifford. There are multiple ways for this to happen. It requires Ryan to have a good start to the year, and I know his overall prospect status, I think, would have an arrow trending downward, but I just look at this as basic roster management. If I look at the top prospects from the New York Mets system and who can fill holes that we think are there and are very glaring, Ryan Clifford being the first baseman for the New York Mets at some point in 2025 feels high on that list. So I know everybody's down on him, but he still has the raw power. You don't have to worry about his defense if you stick him at first base, and I can very easily see a world where it's Memorial Day and we're talking about Mark Vientos' first base defense, or we're worried about the production we're getting offensively at a third base. It is very easy to me to see that scenario. You pair that up with Ryan Clifford, who's tearing it up potentially down there in AAA, and he's going to be knocking on the door very quickly. So Ryan Clifford, this is my kind of obscure name, I think, on the list. I mean, he's a household name in terms of prospects, but I don't know if people very easily see a path for him, but I do. So Ryan Clifford for me, joining my list. So go ahead, you can talk about Brett Beatty now.
Well, it's funny because I actually was going to have Ryan Clifford be one of my guys as well here, Chris. I think you laid out why very well. I think what it really comes down to, the brass tacks, is as we stand here recording on February 4th, Pete Alonso is still a free agent.
It's true.
The Mets don't have a clear first baseman option. Those two facts, combined with Clifford's success as a slugger at the AA level last year, you mentioned his 18 home runs. He also had an 815 OPS, 457 slugging, 359 on base. His average, not anything to write home about. But again, this is not a league that's not about batting average. It's about power. More often than not, it's about the ability to get on base. Clifford was able to do both of those things quite well in Double-A. He had 63 walks to his 117 strikeouts. Obviously, you'd like to get that strikeout number down, but 63 walks is a great number to see there. 18 home runs, like you said. And because of the Mets' lack of a first baseman, because of Pete Alonso's never-ending free agency, the timeline to call up Ryan Clifford gets expedited. When you have a first base prospect that is near the top of any ranking, it's fair to say that, listen, there's a spot on the roster for him. We've discussed that David Stearns might not like elevating players twice in a season, and he's obviously started at ended last season at Double-A. So there might be something that Stearns has to get over with the way he normally does things. But it's not out of the question either that he comes right up from Double-A. We've seen players on other teams have that happen to them and be successful. The two most obvious examples of that to me are both on the Braves: Michael Harris and Spencer Schwellenbach, both Double-A guys that got called up to the MLB level and played out of their minds and are now bona fide members of that Braves roster going forward. And I think Ryan Clifford has a chance to be that kind of guy for the Mets, especially if they are not able to find another solution at first base, as long as this Pete Alonso thing continues to drag on.
I'll throw my third name out there, and I know he's going to be on your list, so we can just get this name out of the way. Let's talk about Brendan Sproat, because I think he's the first guy. It requires him to get off to a good start in AAA, which is where he's going to start the year for the New York Mets. But I'm reading tea leaves here. The team had chances last year to promote Bleav Tidwell. The team had chances last year to promote Dom Hamill into important rotation spots, and Hamill and Tidwell are still considered among the upper tier of Mets prospects. And those guys were passed over. And Brandon Sproat rose through the organization as the year went on and is going to start the year in AAA. And I don't have to do this, but I'll do the thought exercise so everybody understands. The sixth man in the rotation right now for the New York Mets is Paul Blackburn, who's coming off of fluid being removed from his spine. So I can't guarantee that he's going to pitch the entire year. Their number 5 starter, at least according to Fangraphs, is a former closer that they're making into a starter in Clay Holmes. Their number 3 starter is Frankie Montas, who has not been the epitome of health. Do I need to discuss how much time Kodai Senga missed last year? We always will have that start against the Braves. But other than that, we didn't get a lot from Kodai Senga. And Sean Manaea and David Peterson were relatively healthy last year. David Peterson, once he came back from the hip thing, was fine. And Sean Manaea didn't miss any time. So I've got 3 question marks almost immediately. And I know how modern baseball works. I'm going to need a starter at some point. I'm going to need somebody in my minor league system. And I got to tell you, if he hadn't already been promoted once throughout the year, I still believe that we would have seen Brandon Sproat at the end of the year when Christian Scott got hurt and they needed to have somebody in that rotation. I am convinced that if it wasn't going to be for a double promotion, that just felt like it was a fast track for a guy who probably didn't warrant the fast track, that he would have been in the big leagues last year because of how well he was pitching. And so to me, we know at some point throughout the year, a spot is going to open up. And I know everybody can throw Griffin Canning's .4 projected WAR from Fangraphs in my face. And there's a story that tried to do that, which we might get to here at some point on the show. But Brendan Sproat is going to make this team at some point. He's going to make starts in 2025. So I've got Bryce Montas de Oca. I've got Ryan Clifford, and now I got Brandon Sproat. And now Jack's going to tell you why Mark Vientos is going to be a prospect that's going to make an impact in 2025.
No. You once again took my guy that I was going to talk about next. Brandon Sproat is, I mean, you already pretty much said it all, Chris. He is the next man up for the Mets rotation, and it's very obvious that that's the case, especially given some of the players that were in the Mets farm system, like Mike Vasil, who is no longer there because the Mets did not value him as a prospect nearly as much. They left him off the 40-man roster. He ended up getting claimed. Brandon Sproat is very clearly the next pitching prospect that the Mets hope to promote and be that guy. And when you lay out all of the issues with the rotation as it stands right now, all of the question marks that we have, especially with injury concerns, and Lord knows the Mets have had a history of having to change things on the fly with their starting rotation. Brandon Sproat is very clearly I've said this two or three times now, the next guy up. And yeah, his pure ERA numbers in Syracuse are not great. 753 in 7 games. But when you think about what kind of development that the Mets are going to be able to do with him throughout this offseason, throughout spring training, he'll get to work with Jeremy Hefner some more, who has obviously had a lot of success with developing pitchers at the major league level. It becomes clear that there's a spot for Sproat in this rotation at some point. And to me, yeah, he's my number 4 pick. And I'll pitch it off to you unless you want me to conclude my list here. But
yeah, why don't you conclude your list, because I think I'm about to blow everybody's mind with my my next selection. So I just want to confirm something, because I don't want to pull a Jack and have somebody who has been in the big leagues for 3 seasons.
All right. So I'm going to bring up a guy that you mentioned in passing when you were talking about Brandon Sproat, and that's Dom Hamill. I think when I look at this Mets roster and the biggest questions, obviously first base and power hitting are kind of hand in hand in the biggest need in the starting lineup and position players. We mentioned Ryan Clifford. There's still a chance, I guess, that Pete Alonso comes back. There's still a couple more weeks before pitchers and catchers report for things to change. But outside of that, the biggest question marks are in the rotation, and
Yep.
The biggest possibility for changes and flexibility and the need for depth is just in the pitching staff as a whole. And if Brandon Sproat's the next guy up, Dom Hamill's the guy right after him, at least according to any source you look at. He's a guy that's been in the minors now for 2-3 years. He played all of last year in Syracuse. Again, ERA is nothing to write home about, but he started 27 games. He threw 124 in 2/3 innings, struck out 124 guys. If he's able to cut his walks down from the 77 that he had, there's a spot for him on the major league roster in the starting rotation. I think if some of these question marks, like the Griffin Cannings, like the Clay Holmes, who might get moved to the bullpen if he struggles, like the Paul Blackburns, who are dealing with spinal fluid leaks, there are spots for him there. Alternatively, there might be a spot for him in the bullpen if guys like Ryan Stanek don't live up to what they pitched like in the late part of the season, the postseason. If, let's say, AJ Minter doesn't perform the way that the Mets hope, Daniel Nunez, a guy that I mentioned earlier that we hope is going to be good, but is coming off an injury. There are so many question marks in pitching in general every year. And to have a couple of minor league depth options like Brandon Sproat, like Dom Hamill, makes me feel like there are spots for them this year to contribute. I don't feel that way as much about guys like, and I don't mean to steal this player from you before you mention him, but guys like Drew Gilbert, who are just another outfielder in the Mets litany of outfielders. Guys like Jet Williams, who are either a middle infielder or a center fielder in a year where the Mets have many middle infielders and several options to play center field. So I feel like when I'm looking at the 2025 roster, the questions we have, and the current prospects that are ready to come up to the major league level, Brandon Sproat and Dom Hamill are 2 of the main guys that I would point to and say, I could see these guys pitching legit important innings in August and September. So that's my 5th guy. To recap the 5 that I had on my list:
Daniel Mauricio, Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos,
Daniel Nunez, Luis Angel Acuna, Brandon Sproat, Dom Hamill, and Ryan Clifford.
This is a call your shot kind of guy for me. And I have the Fangraphs minor league depth chart available to me. And in scrolling these names, I just look for little wrinkles, little pieces of information that can tell me something. And I'll tell you, this guy has an uphill battle to be. And again, the framework for this is guys that we think can contribute. But it would not be me doing this list if I didn't take one dart throw, right? Like I just have to. I'm just going to take a dart throw. And if this guy gets called up and does something, then I'll look like a genius. So I'm going to use one of my 5. Since you cheated the rules, I'm going to cheat the rules on one and call my shot on a guy. Okay?
Sure. Absolutely.
And the guy I'm going to call my shot on, this is just a hunch on my part. And I look at how a player was acquired, and I look at when a player was acquired. And look, the bullpen for the New York Mets in the minor leagues, there are a bunch of names: Sean Reed Foley, Tyler Zuber, Huascar Brazoban, Max Kranick. I mean, all of these just guys, right? That over the course of time, David Stearns just acquires, and he just has available. But there's a guy who, according to Fangraphs, could potentially start the year at AAA. He might start the year at AA. That's where he ended last year. But he was acquired in the AAA portion of the Rule 5 draft. And I think that is very, very telling. It means that the Mets organization saw something in this player that they wanted to use, not the big league Rule 5 draft, but in the minor league Rule 5 draft, they wanted to get this guy into their organization. And that means David Stearns, at least somewhat, had a hand in that process, right? Guys who were here or acquired before David Stearns, I don't have that tangible connection that I can link together to say, oh, that prospect's going to get called up. But I got a guy that was drafted in the Rule 5 portion in December, and he was from an organization that is known for farting out good pitchers. I mean, the Los Angeles Dodgers, they can make anybody a solid reliever. So this is my dart throw. Michael Hobbs, 25-year-old reliever that the Mets took in the Rule 5 AAA portion of the draft. And again, all I'm telling you, the Dodgers, a well-run organization when it comes to pitcher development. And the New York Mets saw something in this kid that said, you know what? In the AAA portion, the minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft, we're taking him. You don't have to do this, right? The Rule 5 draft is what the Rule 5 draft is. The Mets sought out this guy, brought him in. So if there's going to be a guy that David Stearns brought in and identified as, man, this is a reliever that just being kept under wraps because nobody's talking about him because the Dodgers are so good, I'm going to grab him. He's going to be a part. So that's me calling my shot with Michael Hobbs. That's what I've got for you.
I like that. That's a great call. I am unfamiliar with his game for now, but Chris, based on the fact that he was with the Dodgers and based on how good the Mets have been recently at developing some of their pitching talent, there's a real chance that this is a guy that we're going to know real well by August and September.
And I'll finish my list with Drew Gilbert. I do think there is a pathway for him to be up and contributing as an outfielder. I think if Starling Marte gets traded before the beginning of the season, I think he'd be the first man up. I think if Jesse Winker struggles, I laid this out on the last show that we did. I think that if Jesse Winker struggles, they're not paying him a ton. They can just cut him, right? David Stearns has shown, like, if it's something's not working, I'll cut him. And if Drew Gilbert's lighting it up in AAA, like just putting up some stupid numbers, and Jesse Winker's DHing for the New York Mets, and it's just a disaster, the fan base is going to be like, just call up the young kid, man. Like, you said that this is what you were going to do. Like, Drew Gilbert sitting right there. And so I can very easily see. And then I think if there's an injury to Brandon Nimmo, there's an injury in center field, or there's an injury to Juan Soto, or whatever the case may be, where there's a spot that opens up, truthfully, look at the outfielders that the Mets have right now at AAA. There's not a guy that's that veteran big league guy that's had a ton of service time. Like, there just isn't. There's not a Jose Iglesias type in the outfield for the Mets. Right. Like, they just don't have that veteran journeyman that's been around the block. So I don't think there's the battle of if somebody's only going to miss a week or two, like, there's no internal option that's better than Drew Gilbert. So I can very easily see a path for him to get called up. And just to see how he ended the year, he played 56 games to end the year in AAA, and he got called up directly from Single A. They just skipped a bunch of leagues with him and said, hey, you're going to AAA. And he played in 56 games, hit 10 home runs, struck out a bunch, 20.6% K rate. That was a problem. But made the jump from Single A to AAA and was fine. And he's projected this year for 10 home runs in the minors. So we'll see. But Drew Gilbert, another guy that I'll call my shot on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anything could happen, right? Like, we stand here right now and we say, oh, the Mets have a million outfielders: Brandon Nimmo, Jesse Winker, Jose Siri, Tyrone Taylor, Juan Soto, obviously, but Jeff McNeil. But there's always a chance that a lot of those guys, or a few of those guys, underperform. Starling Marte, an aging veteran that could be on his way out. Like, there are certainly chances for Drew Gilbert to be on the roster at some point. And I guess to reiterate that point, Chris, he's your number 5 guy, right? Like, he's not your number 1 pick for biggest contributor to the 2025 roster. This is a guy that it'll take a little bit for him to get there, but once he does, there's a really good chance that he's someone that the Mets are relying on down the stretch.
Yeah, 100%. That's going to do it for us. We finally got this episode out. So truthfully, I don't know what's next for this podcast, because we just have always had this episode in our back pocket to tease on end to just discuss with you, and now we don't have that. But pitchers and catchers already reporting across the league. The new Mets spring training hat, 10 out of 10 rating. Jack has the old one. Yes. At some point, there will be an episode of this podcast in the future where both of us are wearing the new one, because it is elite. Like, just
probably soon, a soon episode.
If there was ever just a hat that embodied what spring training is supposed to be, it is the Mets spring training hat. Like, it is just the epitome of just cool and fun and laid back, which is everything that spring training should be. And so before you know it, we're going to have spring training games and data and positional battles and all of this stuff to keep an eye on here. And so we're almost there, everybody. We've almost made it through the long winter. We've almost made it to the season being back and the Mets continuing their pursuit for a championship in the Steve Cohen era. But that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the pod. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. You want to see the video version of the show, just search up Jack McKessie on YouTube. But we will be back soon enough with another episode of the Bleav in Mets podcast. And
maybe we'll see Pete Alonso news. But
yeah, you know, I could. That's just a perpetual tease. We just always tease that because Pete Alonso.
Holding my breath, I'm going to pass out at this point. So we need something to happen. Even if he doesn't end up on the Mets, it's going to be news.
Yeah, so we'll see if Pete Alonso chooses a team by the next time we get onto this podcast. But as always, everybody, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.